What is a tabletop role-playing game? Maybe you've heard of games like Dungeons & Dragons, Call of Cthulhu, or even Star Wars RPG. Maybe your kid is just starting to find one and get into it. Or maybe you just watched Stranger Things and are curious more about what is this D&D thing. But you have no idea on what kind of game this is or how it's even played. Well, my job today is to fix that and give a complete breakdown and quell any confusion or concerns you may have. So, let's get started. Welcome to the Tabletop Empire. My name is Nate, and today we will be covering what is a tabletop role-playing game and what does playing one look like. So let's start with that first question. What is a tabletop RPG? Well, the simple answer is that it's just a cooperative storytelling game. But let's dive into the details. The game has typically two kinds of players. You have your game master, also known as the dungeon master, but we commonly refer to them as the GM or the DM. Each game will have one person play the GM, and typically they'll stay in this role for the entirety of the story. And then the rest of the players play what are called player characters, or PCs for short. GMs and PCs have different roles at the table and different ways that they play. To explain this, I'm going to put this into the lens of Star Wars. The PCs are playing the main characters in the story. So in Star Wars, this would be Luke, Han, Leia, and Chewie. And then the GM will play a narrator of sorts, describing the scenes, as well as playing any non-playable characters or NPCs, which are pretty much everybody in the world that's not a player character. So this would be like your stormtroopers, Darth Vader, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Yoda, miscellaneous rebel fighters, and so forth. So the GM sets the scene, describing what the players can see, maybe what any NPCs are saying or doing, and then the players can make any decision or do anything that they can think of, as long as it falls within the world's boundaries and structure. And then as the PCs make decisions that affect the world, the GM describes what that might look like, and all of this goes back and forth until by the end you have a story that everybody worked on and built together. Typically, these stories will be told over multiple sessions, which altogether is called a campaign. So think of a book. The book is the campaign, and then the players meeting together to play a session is like a chapter in the book. The session can last as long as the group desires, or as long as they're available to play, but it'll typically range between 2 and 8 hours. As a married man with a child, playing with other married men with children, we typically get to play about 3 hours every other week, give or take. Other people with more time may play 3 times a week for 8 hours at a time, or more, or less. Most people aren't that hardcore though. Sometimes players will play the same characters over multiple campaigns lasting years and years. So think of it like sequel books. You have the same characters in the same world, but everything altogether is growing and progressing. On the other hand, sometimes players play what are called one-shots, which are contained short story games that typically last about one session, or one shot. Tabletop RPGs are notorious for dice, which come into play whenever the player wants to make a decision or do something that has a chance of failing. So let's say Jimmy, who's playing Han Solo, is trying to climb a wall. And this task has some level of difficulty, so he would roll dice in what are called a check, to check and see if he's able to do the thing. And the difficulty of the task can differ depending on however difficult it is to climb this wall. Another example is, let's say Curtis, who's playing Luke Skywalker, wants to maybe try to bargain his price for landing at a spaceport. He could roll a check to see how successful he is at negotiating the price down. Each character will be better at some checks more so than others because every character has what are called skills, such as athletics, negotiation, mechanics, and then characteristics such as strength or charisma or intelligence, or even some special abilities that might help with some of these checks. In the same way that there are a bunch of different racing games that vary from Need for Speed to Mario Kart, there are many different kinds of tabletop RPGs. They share the same general structure, however, they vary in a few different areas. One example of this is the dice. Dungeons & Dragons is probably the most popular tabletop RPG, and that uses a 20-sided dice. And Star Wars RPG, which is what my channel's about, uses proprietary narrative dice. Other tabletop RPGs may use your traditional 6-sided dice, and then there's a plethora of other tabletop RPGs that all vary in the way that they do their dice. Another way that tabletop RPGs vary is the game setting. So Dungeons & Dragons is going to be kind of like Lord of the Rings. Star Wars RPG is going to be set in the Star Wars universe. And then there are a wide variety of other settings, such as there's superhero settings, other fantasy settings, other sci-fi settings, horror settings. There are even books that are made to be any setting to fit whatever the player wants to play in. And I do want to give a quick disclaimer to any concerned parents out there. Dungeons & Dragons is not satanic, it's not witchcraft, it's nothing like that. The game is a collaborated story game, so it's going to be whatever the players want their story to be. If you are a parent and you are concerned about this, please do not be. Just talk to your kid. More than likely, they just want to play a game where they get to pretend to be a character in Lord of the Rings or Star Wars or another universe from a book or a movie that they love. So what does playing a tabletop RPG look like? Well, I think this is best answered by explaining what role-playing looks like. What does it look like to pretend to be a character? It really isn't as difficult or as complicated as you might think, and don't worry, I'm going to give some examples. As far as I can tell, there's really only two facets to role-playing at the table, and no, one of them is not dressing up in costume, though you are more than free to do that if that is what you desire to do. The first facet is just speaking from your character's perspective. So instead of saying something like, I walk up to the blacksmith and I ask him for his finest sword, the interaction should go something more like this. I walk up to the counter and ring the little bell, to which the GM would respond with, a dwarf wearing a battle axe walks up to the counter and says, is there something I can help you with? The player at this point could respond with, yes, hello sir, I'm looking to buy your finest sword. You don't have to use an accent though. Some players find it helps them to get into character and to help distinguish from when they are talking versus when their character is talking. And then the second facet is just decision making. Putting yourself in your character's shoes and making the decision that they would make. If you're playing a character like Han Solo, would the first thing that Han Solo does be go to a cantina? Would it be look for work? Or would it be just explore the area and see what you can find? And then just doing that. One mistake that I see new player characters make is they make decisions based on their skills on their character sheet. So let's say a stormtrooper is coming their way. Often a new player will say something like, I want to roll for stealth, when it should go something like this. The GM says there is a stormtrooper walking towards you, to which you respond with, I look around, are there any like boxes or crates that I can hide behind? And then the GM can tell them whatever skill they need to roll. Yeah, roll for stealth. And between speaking from your character's perspective and making decisions like your character would make them, that's really all there is to role-playing. And then little decisions build up on top of each other to make a story that everybody worked on together. And that is a tabletop role-playing game. If you want to see what playing a tabletop RPG practically looks like, check out the card up in the corner. I went through an episode of The Mandalorian and I transformed it into a tabletop RPG session. If this video was helpful, please do me a favor and blast that like button. If you have any questions at all, drop them down in the comments. I'll do my best to answer everybody. And if you want to see weekly Star Wars RPG content, consider subscribing to the channel. A shout out and a huge thanks to the Patreon supporters. You guys really help this channel grow. I appreciate you so much. Thank you to everybody for watching. I will see you guys in the next one. But until then, and as always, may the Force be with you.